Brought to you in association with Grendel Press. This is Werewolf, the podcast. A serial killer drama.
That's the sound of the police! That's the sound of the...
Hello, this is Will Your Werewolf. This is Werewolf, the podcast. We're on episode 74. We're on part 4 of the Wererat series. Please go back and listen to the other 3 episodes. This will make a bit more sense. Thanks for listening. Now, you might wonder why I'm sitting naked in the middle of a field on a somewhat compressed version of what was once a lovely Audi A5 in red. Added to that, you may be wondering why I am holding a rubberized mask in my left hand that would give its wearer that somewhat shitty look of a poorly sculpted rat. If you're wondering those things, I suggest you listen to the other 3 episodes of Jimmy the Wererat that I've already done. If you're not willing to do that, then what I want you to do is write down your guess at this point of how it all works out in the end. And to be honest, it'll probably be a lot better than this shitty story that I'm going to tell you. I am, at this moment, somewhat perturbed at what has just happened. There's been car crashes and flying cows, and they've been a big part of the last few moments. In the still after the storm, I am having a difficult telepathic discussion with a very pissed off ancient wolf soul called Fen. For fuck's sake, Will, why on earth would someone try and fucking fuck us up when we'd never ever fucking fucked with them? What a fucking fucker of a fucking fuck, said Fen. I was mesmerised by the lack of his vocabulary. He's been around for like several thousand years. He should be really, really good at this kind of stuff. I mean, my human dad would have definitely pointed out the apparent lack of intelligence shown by his lack of language. Weird how as you get older you pick up the social narratives of your parents. I used to think he was being a dick saying that nonsense to me, but now I could get his point. What a fucking cunt of a thing to point that bollocks out and it to be true. There was a silence as I looked upon the carnage in the field. All I could hear was the dull plinks of a plinking engine as it cooled. What had once been a field full of cows was now a field full of bits of cows. Or cow, I don't know. It was challenging to say where one bit of cow started and another ended. There were literal bits everywhere. It would have been hard to hit all these cows on purpose with 100 cars, never mind hit them with 2. There was one still alive though, and it sat in the corner of the field with a cow-like face. I pointed at the cow and gave Fen a shout. Hey, look, there's still one left. Look at its face. It looks like it's got PTSD or something, doesn't it? No, Will, that is how cows look, Fen said dismissively. Oh, well, that explains that. And thank God it changes the subject from you swearing at me, I replied, tossing the mask into the wreckage of the Audi. I jumped off the car and turned to look at the road. No one had stopped or done anything, but I could hear the sirens of the approaching emergency vehicles in the distance. It's only been a short amount of time since the non-accident, but help was on its way. It was time to go. I'd already raked through the wreckage of the wrecked humans in the wreck of the car. I'd watched one slowly die from his wounds as he bled out, asking for help. The look in his little eyes as he realised he was going to die was incredible. The true loss of hope. The pain caused by the lack of his legs and then death. I mean, I could have helped him by ending it quickly for him, but why? I could watch him die in agony. I had to get something out of this situation, and a good, long, agonising death always cheers me up. They had no identification or anything on them that could give me any clues that would be useful in finding the reason for what had just happened. The only clue of any value was that I had a rubber rat mask. It was a shit clue, really, because I'd already worked out that it was one of them Wererat cunts that had given the order to try and kill me by running me off the road. I had no idea which one had given the order, but I was pretty upset. In fact, I would say it was more than that. You could say I was actually mad about what had just happened. Right. It was now time to go and sort this the fuck out. And by sort this the fuck out, I mean, to take my anger and frustration out on them, or one of them, or something. They had crushed my biscuit in killing my lovely Porsche. I'd forgot that Fen would be reading my mind. Crushed my biscuit? He asked. What the fuck does that mean? I replied with it. It's a metaphor or an analogy or something. I quite like it. I was a bit embarrassed. As the blue lights came into view, I knew it was time to go. I mean, we could wait around, but that would lead to awkward questions and things. So to get on with the rest of my day, I became my big black wolf shape and set off across the fields and being watched by the lonesome cow as it chewed on blood-coated grass. I often think back to that moment and what that cow was feeling. I mean, think of the decimation that it had just seen, the huge crash, the death and the destruction of its herd mates, the screaming of the dying cows, and then the final moments as a wolf ran from it all. But then it was just a fucking cow, it didn't think at all. Or did it? There are some downsides to being a werewolf. Not many, but one of them is the loss of clothing thing. I like nice clothes and looking good. Tailoring is my thing. So when the stuff that you love gets ripped and torn off your body, it does hurt me deeply. The other downside is getting a naked human back into a place without being busted for being a naked human. To be honest, it seems a little easier to get around as a big black wolf. Some people do not want to believe they see a big black wolf. What they see is a big black dog. A big black dog is much more acceptable than a guy walking around with his cock hanging out. I finally got back to my temporary residence at the hotel and spa and managed, with the aid of about the right sized dead person, to get some clothes to get myself back into the room. Fen and I were still a little incensed about how we'd been treated at this horrendous moment. When I got back to the room, I found a nice bunch of white lilies with a note attached on the attaché table in the room. I like lilies. They are beautiful flowers, and only the stink of the pollen is a putter-offerer to me. Again, I knew this was a clever way for a person or a gigantic rat to show that they had done their due diligence and knew me so well they had sent me my favourite flowers. Edward, I think, was trying to scare me. The only problem you might have is that I don't get scared of things really easy. I might do threatened by something. That then gets me interested in removing that threat. I also get a little butthurt when threatened by stuff, so I will do my damnedest to remove that threat. I also like to make it interesting, so those threatening me will send the world a little message about how I respond in these situations. Basically, I was in the mood to go fuck someone up, and that someone was this toolbag Edward. The note with the lilies was on handmade paper, in a handmade paper envelope, and the writing, of course, was handwritten and made to look exceptionally beautiful. It read, "You will be reading this only on the occasion of your survival. If that is the case, you are evidently a fascinating fellow that would be worthy of my interest. If you wish to meet me, I will be available from 7 p.m. on Wednesday evening. Please pop around for food and drinks. Your friend, Edward." Underneath it was the address: Canary Wharf Roof Gardens, 43 Wisherman's Walk, London, E14 5HA. After the faff of hiring an Uber of all things, I got to the address at about 6:30 p.m. I was still properly fucking annoyed, so I knew that I would have to use that on something. Although strangely, I liked the driver, who was a cool guy from Turkey who regaled me with the tales that entertained me for the entire journey. A rare thing, so I gave him a 5-star review. His name is Denise Kaplan, which strangely means sea tiger. Well, it does according to him. If you can get him, I highly recommend his stories. Fen and I were dropped off outside the building, and I made my way in with Fen. He was a good 200 yards in front of me, of course, checking things out. Usually, I would get my invisible best friend to scour the building, but today, I thought speed was the important factor in this adventure. So, as is often the case, we half-assed the scoping out of the site. He was now on the escalator and passing the bar when we met our first strange thing. At the metal security gate, there was 8 police officers. Fen stopped for a moment because these were not the ordinary police people of old London townie. They were tough-looking mother lovers to a man. Each of them was hyper-aware and stationed specifically in locations where they could see each other and have overlapping viewpoints, and, as I knew, that really meant overlapping firing points. It was proper tactical bollocks. On further inspection, he also found another 10 popos just hanging around and about beyond the gate. Now, you might ask how I knew these were no ordinary plods. It was pretty simple, as several differences to regular police stood out. The first was probably the one that was the most standy outy. I'm not being nasty about our standard police officer here. I think that they have a very challenging job to do, but these people were not chatting. Yeah, I hate to say it, but one thing you notice with the semi-professional type of guard is that they try not to get bored. This often means that when you are hanging about with your colleagues or mates, you tend to talk about things like football and stuff. They used to talk about inappropriate stuff like the tits and ass on WPC Vicky Davis, but HR has taken all the fun out of that shit these days. Secondly, they were focused and tactically arranged. Every man, sorry about this, but there was no badass lady guards there today, was within line of sight of two others, and they had been given specific areas to watch that they had total eyeball on. That's super army lingo right there. The other point was that focus was not skipped either. No one was looking around and thinking about tits or Vicky's ass. Thirdly, they were armed. Now, if you are American or from another gun-toting country, you will find this difficult to believe. Our police officers are 99% unarmed in the workplace. They do their tough and scary job, usually with only a tiny baton that they are incredibly poorly trained to use as protection. Sometimes, if they are lucky, they may get CS spray or a taser, but even these are rare. So to see guns on coppers was a dead giveaway that these were either unlikely to be coppers or special coppers with specialised training in specialised things, and it would be especially bothersome, although it may become a special kind of fun, especially for me, to deal with them. The guns were a random assortment as well. Most pistols used by the police in London tend to be Glock 17s, either alone or in combination with MP5SFs. Before me was a smorgasbord of weaponry, making these guys look like a private security army, or as we call them in daily jargon, mercenaries. It looked like they were setting up for a right royal rumble, and I was walking into it. I felt like the Undertaker. I also felt my anal sphincter give a light twitch, and I didn't even need a shit. This was going to be an exciting adventure. As I got to the top of the escalator, I became the centre of attention as eyes started to land on me. No, not literally eyes land on me, that'd be disgusting, and that's going to come a little later. Two officers walked slowly towards me with another giveaway that they were not policemen. Their MP5s had no straps from which to dangle them. This is often an affectation of the special forces, as apparently the strap could be used to ninja choke you or something when in close combat, so they don't wear them. They stopped several yards from me, and one covered me with his machine pistol. Did you hear that? He actually pointed his fucking gun at me. That wasn't polite. The other came to within 2 steps of me, where he stood holding his gun across his chest with his left hand and formed a fence with his straight right arm and began to speak. Proper good procedure. Good evening, sir. I'm afraid that there is a bomb threat in this vicinity tonight, so I will have to ask you to turn around and leave for your own safety. I could now see that Fen had walked into the empty barbecue place at the other end of this lovely construction. I have to say, it was a beautiful construction, and I stood staring at what was obviously Jimmy's twin brother through Fen's eyes. Edward was staring back at Fen. He was by himself, and unlike his brother, was dressed in a somewhat businessman-like manner, a lot more traditionally than his dandified brother. He did not have the affectations or the expensive taste of his brother. The suit looked like it was an M&S special. As he noticed Fen, he lifted his glass and saluted his presence. I could not see anybody around the man in the bar, so I thought, fuck it, let's get him. I requested Fen's return and he flew back to me and we became the werewolf. I transformed almost instantly into my big black motherfucking monstrous self. I felt alive as I enveloped myself in my pelt and viewed the world through my extra senses. I had lived my life with one standout war cry, and that was, to retaliate first! I covered the distance between myself and the first police officer, stripping him of his weapon by ripping off his left arm and then catching him by the collar of his stab vest, which made a wonderful handle to hurl him. I love these moments as everything goes into slow motion for me and the world becomes a little place where I only have one thing to do, and that thing is to kill and maim all those before me. As I mentioned previously, I now hurled the officer I was dragging at 3 more policemen who were halfway through raising their weapons as he struck. This sent them somewhat into disorder and out of the picture for the moment. The man who had been supporting the interrogating officer had started firing, and I felt 2 impacts in my chest from the 5 shots he fired. These were not the single-round MP5s that the usual police would be issued, but at least semi-automatic versions. I knew that those would not stop me, and that I would soon heal and be able to move on, so I leapt, landing with both feet on the man's chest with a delightful crunch, and the gun fired once more. I briefly checked where to go next from my sleeping policeman's vantage point. All were now looking at me and going through well-drilled actions. Some took up firing points, hunkering down. Another was communicating with someone on radio about what was happening and probably asking for backup. More were forming a defensive barrier, slowly walking backwards along the impressive structure and moving to a protection point they had been told to fall back to. Luckily for my training, I knew all these tactics and could use them against them. The first line was easy to cross. The mercenaries weren't very much used to such a fast-moving target. They also weren't used to a target that would ignore the incoming fire, and I was soon in behind their hard points, where they hid, ripping and tearing through the men behind them. Bullets rained around me, which was quite shocking, as these men would usually be overly aware that firing on their people was frowned upon. But these guys didn't give a fuck. They just wanted to put me down quickly, so collateral damage was inevitable, and I have to say, they probably killed and injured more of their colleagues than I did. I was hit several times, but the speed at which I moved and the pinball nature of my changing directions meant that I was not an easy target. Even the best can panic when a werewolf is in their midst. I drew their fire as I moved to each man, so they showered the area with bullets. I was buzzing, as we say in Manchester. This shit was the bomb. For those other people who did not get any of these colloquialisms, God, I can't even say that, colloquialisms, that's it. That means I was having a jolly good time. The man that was behind the bit of cover I ran at was out of ammo for his MP5, and he quickly changed to his. Wow, it was a Beretta. In that moment, I recognised it as a Beretta 92. That's an excellent gun. Not the Austrian Glock 17, he should have. I might get that on my way out if I've time. Anyway, back to what I was doing. I was on him in 3 bounds. Unlike the films, soldiers are taught that you do not let go of your pistol to have a stand-up fight. You have a stand-up fight with that pistol. As I landed on him, I raked his vest, which held and didn't rip. He lifted his gun to me and shot me in the shoulder. He wasn't panicking or in fear. He gave a good fight, as good as he could, even though he realised that he was a dead man. In those moments, you notice little details that you would not notice without this level of focus. He had a blue eye and a green eye, and they were giving me an angry and work-like look. The 9mm he fired entered my body, shocking me for a moment with its violence as it tore its way in. I slapped the gun from his hand as he pulled the trigger again and bit deep into his throat. I wrenched back and forth, slicing and ripping it from him and then spat it in his face. Time went back to normal for a moment as I sat on the man watching the blood flow from his wrecked neck, looking at him bubble and drown in his own blood. A brave man. I flexed my shot shoulder and allowed a moment to work the bullet out of the wound. It had impacted on the bone, so I had to reach into the blast wound, grab the slug between my finger and thumb and remove it so the healing process could speed up and give me back a working shoulder. All firing had stopped. The retreating men had taken up cover and were waiting for the next werewolf wave. I rested and healed up, ready for the next push. Turning to my left, I saw him. Only for a moment, but there sat the little rat soul of Jimmy's. There sat Bert, looking at me. He noticed me staring and became what looked embarrassed in a ratty way. He rubbed his front paws over each other as though trying to soothe himself, then smiled and gave me a little thumbs up. Suddenly the world changed as pops and sound waves struck me. I'd been hit by a number of what must have been grenades. Luckily, the damage was only to my ears as my pelt absorbed most of the shrapnel from the little blasts, but I knew I would be temporarily deaf. Oh, and by the way, grenades are not like what you see in the films. They're somewhat, a bit of a letdown, really. There's no giant fiery explosion that blows you off your feet. There is somewhat a bit of a minor bang like a cheap firework, and then lots of flying red-hot metal to rip you to shreds. It really fucking hurts, though. That was it now. They were actually trying to kill me, so this was going to be fucking awful for them. I moved. I am often quicker than human reflexes can follow, so the gunfire rattled around me as I hit my first target, removing his leg and arm as I passed to get to another. I jinked and spiraled, allowing most of the gunfire to miss. Those shots that did hit weren't too serious. I went through them. Not like a knife through butter, but like an angry werewolf through soldiers. By the end of my rampage, I stood outside the restaurant door, smeared in my and their blood. I stood a while, healing the wounds that my body bore. The last soldier had struck my left limb with a shotgun blast that was, let's just say, very inconvenient, but I felt it knitting back together as I grew back to my full strength and got my breathing back together. When ready, I entered the restaurant and transformed as I walked through the door to find my new target. I now stood naked and glistening from my little personal war. The background noise was the sound of the dying and the maimed as they suffered and struggled with the wounds that I'd left them. I was in a post-orgasmic mood. I also knew I had much more fun to be had. There was one man in the room, and it was Edward. He sat at a table with a glass in his hand, smiling at me as he sipped it. His eyes were full of mirth. He was enjoying this shit. He put his glass down and started to fucking clap. Well, Will, that was very impressive. I could see why Jimbo wants you on his side. I tried to move slowly towards him. I was trying to make it as imperceptible as possible. I needed to close the distance. He laughed. You're pretty pissed at me, huh? Can you not see that I wanted to see you in action, see what you had before I bid on you? The good news is I'm in. How much do you want, mate? Confidence oozed off the little ratty cunt. He still did not move as I got closer. I was almost in range where a leap would have him. He knew it. Now, before you do something fucking stupid, I understand that you're pissed off, but this ain't gonna help. I started my run and attack. I transformed as I moved. I charged and hit him like a tsunami, like a fucking werewolf. I raked and slashed, but nothing was there. All that was there was a huge pile of rats bolting for the corners of the room and also attacking every inch of me. It was hell as I swung from side to side, stomping and smashing, killing and biting. They were in amongst my fur and sinking teeth deep. But then suddenly they were gone. There was laughter from the corner where a gigantic malformed rat sat on its haunches, obviously amused by my antics. It was a horrific thing to see, half human, half rat. It was scarred and mangy, its tail like a huge raw worm hung on the floor. Its pelt was stained and rotten. Its eyes, they will fill me for a long time. They were pits of blackness, sucking black holes of things. And then it dissolved again into hundreds of small rats that scattered. Laughter rang out. Be seeing you, Willie, rang in my head. A small blue rat posit sat on the bar. This was a much more evil-looking thing than Jimmy's posit Bert. It was a small representation of the giant thing that had just been sat there. It turned away to hop off the bar and leave, but then changed its mind. It turned back, stuck up 2 fingers. Well, maybe not fingers. I don't know, 2 clawed digits, and flipped me off. In my head I heard it laugh. Then it turned and dropped off the bar and out of sight. Fen and I looked at each other. What the fucking fuck is going on, for fuck's sake, asked Fen. Fuck knows, I replied. Thanks for listening. That's part 4 of the Wererat series. If you want to buy me a coffee, there's a link in the description below. It would be greatly appreciated. If you could, share my stories, share my work. I know it's not for everybody, but do you know what? I love you. Bye.
Brought to you in association with Grendel Press. This is Werewolf, the podcast, a serial killer drama.